Everybody, I'm glad that all of you guys can make it out here tonight. Thank you for those who may be joining us online. We appreciate you tuning in as well. Hope you've had a good week throughout this holiday season. I don't know about y'all, but I feel like people are nicer this time of year. At least I've seen a lot of people that have been around me that have been nicer. So it's nice. It's kind of refreshing to feel like people, not cutting you off, like, stopping and letting you go in front of them, whether you're walking through the stores or what have you. People being nice and pick up stuff and just the way they greet you and such. I think it's just refreshing. Hopefully that spirit continues and we can radiate that joy of the Lord throughout this Christmas season, because people need to see it all year long, especially during the holiday season. It's so hectic, a lot of people are so stressed out. But should be stressful. It should be happy and joyful. And hopefully your holiday season will be that way. Just a reminder that we have our holiday party, our adult Christmas party here at the church. Friday night, just a couple of days away. So we invite you to come be a part of that. Then the following, we're going to have our Christmas Eve service a week from Saturday. So excited about that as well. All right. So as we've been working through the book of Acts, there have been some incredible miracles along the way that we've encountered. Some demonstrations of God's power. And it can be hard to remember that these stand out because, it really is it's not easy to forget them, because they stand out as being extraordinary. They're extraordinary things. And like the one we talked about last week. What was something extraordinary that we talked about last week? Miraculous. Anybody remember? Had something to do with falling asleep while the preacher was preaching.
I fell out the window.
Yeah, remember? Eutychus, or whatever his name was, he fell out the window and from the third floor and died. And then, all went down and raised him back to life. So that's certainly something we should remember. It should stick out as one of those kind of extraordinary moments. But most of the time, the work of the disciples and the growth of the church looked a lot more like the passage under consideration tonight that we're going to look at. And the church, though it had grown through extraordinary moments, the little ordinary moments that filled every day have just as much, if not more, impact on the kingdom, as we will see tonight. So I want us to talk about ordinary days, because our lives, for the most part, are filled with ordinary days. And like we will see tonight, this passage, we probably would just read over it, and we would probably think, not a lot to this. But as we will see tonight, there will be more to it than appears. All right, so we're going to read through verses 1 through 16, and then we'll kind of break it apart and look at some things together. Verse 1 says, "Now it came to pass that when we had departed from them and set sail, running a straight course, we came to Kos. The following day to Rhodes, and from there to Tyre. And finding a ship sailing over to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we had sighted Cyprus, we passed it on the left, sailed to Syria, and landed at Tyre. For there the ship was to unload her cargo. And finding disciples, we stayed there 7 days. And they told Paul through the Spirit not to go up to Jerusalem. When he had come to the end of those days, we departed and went our own way. And they all accompanied us with wives and children. So we were out of the city, and we knelt down on the shore and prayed. When we had taken our leave of one another, we boarded the ship, and they returned home. When we had finished our voyage from Tyre, we came to Ptolemais, and greeted the brethren and stayed with them one day. On the next day, we who were Paul's companions departed and came to Caesarea, and entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. Now this man had 4 virgin daughters who prophesied. And as we stayed many days, a certain prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. And when he had come to us, he took Paul's belt, bound his own hands and feet, and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, so shall the Jews at Jerusalem bind the man who owns this belt, and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." Now when he heard these things, both we and those from that place pleaded with him not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, "What do you mean by weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." So when he would not be persuaded, we ceased, saying, "The will of the Lord we know." And after those days we packed and went up to Jerusalem. Also some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us, and brought with them a certain Manason of Cyprus, an early disciple, with whom we were to lodge. All right. So can you kind of see what it sounds like? We got up from this place, we sailed to here, we got our stuff packed, we talked to these people, we stayed here a couple days. We packed from there, we went to there. We stayed over there a few days, then we packed up and we went to this city. We sailed over here, took a few days journey, got here, the boat unloaded. We stayed here a couple of days for a few days, we talked to this person. Then we went over here, we sailed here, boom. It seems like just kind of ordinary stuff, right? It's not like our day sometimes. You just got stuff that you had to go do. What did you do today? Oh, I just ran a bunch of errands. Nothing noteworthy, right? I just kind of went around, got my hair cut, went, picked up some medicine, went to work. After work, got my dry cleaning done, picked the dog up from the groomer, just kind of all your different stuff that you do. Just ordinary stuff. That's what it sounds like when you look at it. But if you kind of put your thinking cap on and dig down into it, you'll see some themes that kind of pop up that show us a little bit more into what was going on in the church and in the disciples' lives in this passage. So first of all, notice the first theme, and that is a theme of hospitality. There seemed to be this theme, overwhelming theme of, or a spirit of hospitality going on. Because everywhere they went, there was someone welcoming them into their home. How many of you remember years ago, whenever like a pastor would come to town, or a missionary would come to town, or evangelist would come to town, usually they stayed with somebody in the church. That's usually what they did. I remember having them in our house when I was a little boy. I remember a couple of times the preacher coming over and staying with us. And usually that meant you moved out, the kids or somebody moved out of one of their rooms, and you were sleeping on the couch or something, and they got your room for the night. Sometimes people would have an extra bedroom. Maybe it was somebody who was an older family who their children were grown, and they would have an extra bedroom. And that was the case with us. Many times we had, there was a couple of times where we, had an evangelist, a friend, a preacher friend, come over and they would stay with, we had a missionary stay with us and stay in our home and, stay in an extra bedroom. And sometimes they would do that. But somewhere along the line, it seemed like preachers didn't want to do that anymore, okay? Evangelists didn't want to do that anymore. So, and maybe it was just churches felt like, it's too much burden on the families of the community. I don't think it was the fact that the people in the churches weren't hospitable anymore. I think people still have a kind of hospitality, a spirit of hospitality.
But I think back then, there was less ladies working, there was less busyness that we had going on.
Yeah, that's right. There was times changed,
Right.
And so it was a lot more comfortable sometimes for that pastor to have his own place. His kind of ministry has changed a bit. A lot more phones, conversations, a lot more, emails, a lot more communications nowadays than it used to be. Because, remember back then there wasn't no internet, it wasn't cell phones. So if the person came to a place, they were out of town for a week.
And they had nothing they could do except with that church. Now they can still stay connected, they can still work.
Their ministry keeps on going, whatever they're working and whatever things they got going on. So obviously we can see how times have changed. But I think the spirit of hospitality is something that is still alive and well in the church. And we see it played out here in the book of Acts. So in verse 4, they stayed in Tyre there with a group of disciples. They were there for about a week. And so there in Ptolemais, they stayed for about a day with another group. Verse 7, we see that. Verse 8, Caesarea, they stayed with someone named Philip the Evangelist. Y'all remember him? Philip the Evangelist. We met Philip the Evangelist back in Acts chapter 8, whenever the church was getting so growing in Jerusalem, and it was just, there were lots of people being added to the church. Remember, back then we were talking about thousands. I mean, there were thousands of people added, coming to know the Lord and adding to the church. So it was growing rapidly. And the apostles were like, we can't take care of all these people. We can't get to everybody. We can't minister to people. They were taking care of widows. They were feeding families and people who couldn't have their needs met. And so they were trying to do all that. And they were saying, we need to have some extra helpers. So they created deacons. And they said, we need to call out 7 people, 7 men who would serve in this area of serving the people, helping feed and wait on tables and take care of the kind of the hand-to-hand, day-to-day work of the church, while the apostles were doing the teaching, the preaching, and communicating the doctrines and things, and taking care of that. And so there were 7 people called out, and out of those 7 people, Philip was one of those. And y'all might remember that Philip stayed there for a while. They had this great revival going on in Samaria, and then God called Philip out of Samaria and said, listen, I want you to leave, and I want you to go down here into this desert. And along the way, he ran into an Ethiopian eunuch who was reading from the book of Isaiah, and he said, I don't understand this, can you help me? He got up there and talked to him about it, and then he said, well, how can I not be baptized? And so Philip said, well, here's water, and they baptized him. And then Philip ended up going back down south, and then ended up eventually residing in Caesarea. And Paul ends up going down there at one time and spending some time with him, and so does Peter. But Philip the evangelist is living now in Caesarea, where he's made his home. And now obviously he's gotten married, he's gotten a family, he's got these 4 daughters that prophesy. And so they go there and they stay many days. We have an undetermined amount of days that they're staying here. But, here's Paul and his whole entourage of folks staying there. And then after some time, they leave from Caesarea, along with some of those folks from Caesarea, some of the followers of Christ from Caesarea, get back on the ship that has unloaded, and they travel on down through Cyprus, where they stay with a person where they get met up with someone who eventually says, you're going to go stay with this guy, Manason, which Manason gets on the boat with him and says, listen, once we get to the next place, he has a place for you to stay. He's going to provide for you lodging. So it was hospitality. It was like everybody was pitching in. We're going to make sure you got a place to stay. By the way, were they just making sure they had a place to stay? Or were they more likely helping them take care of the food and stuff? They were probably taking care of food, right? Meals. You invite somebody to your house back then, you didn't say, okay, well, fend for yourself. No, these were your honored guests. You're going to make sure they had food to eat, make sure they were nourished and taken care of. And so that was going on. And so this ability to be hospitable is a blessing. And it may be a blessing that God has bestowed upon you. Maybe that's kind of your thing. Maybe you just love being hospitable to others, taking people in, doing for others. And if you have that ability, then don't overlook the tremendous blessing it can bring to others in their lives. It really is a blessing to others, and you should seek to use that gift as much as possible. So if hospitality, I should say, if hospitality made the journey possible, well then the second theme, which is fellowship, made it all that much sweeter. Okay? Because then it wasn't that they just had this hospitality, they had fellowship. They had this time of coming together. And we notice in verse 5, it was the whole family that was involved. It wasn't just the men. When we went to, when I went on this missionary trip to Mexico, we would go from city to city, and we would travel from place to place, seeing the different works, the different churches, because a lot of times they would have house churches in different cities, because people in Mexico City was so big, people couldn't all get to the main church in the middle of town, so they would have various satellite churches that people could come to, and a lot of times it was a church in somebody's house, or a room built off of somebody's house that they would have church in. And so we would visit these different places, and every time we would go, they would always feed us, they would give us a meal, and sometimes it was sandwiches and stuff like that, meats and cheeses, kind of like charcuterie style. And sometimes it would be like full-out meals. Like if we went to some place in the morning, it would be a full-out breakfast. It would be, lunchtime might be sandwiches, and nighttime might be this chicken, and the whole, meals cooked. But here's something interesting. I always thought it was interesting. When we sat down to eat, it was just the men, and the women disappeared. And there was no women. And then after we were done, the women would sit down, and they would eat. And after the women were done eating, then finally the kids would sit down and eat. And the women would feed all the kids, and those kids. It would be the same table. We would sit down at the table, and we would eat our meal. Then we were done, we would get up. The women would come sit down at that same table. They would have their plates fixed, and they would eat. And then after they were done, then they would bring the kids, sit them down at the same table, and then they were all. But they didn't do it all together. But yet they all kind of were there. But we weren't around the kids much. It was like they kept us away from the kids, like kids were going to bother us. But it seems like in this narrative, the kids were there with them. Whenever they were going to leave to sail away to Caesarea, the whole families come down. They all come down. It was the women, the children, their wives and children. Everybody was coming down, seeing them to the shore. So you had the idea that there was a sense of community that was being displayed. So there was love and support evidenced by their actions, by what they were doing. And it was quite, we could only assume that they were sharing meals together. I mean, you can't stay with someone 7 days and not eat. So, there had to be some eating involved. And it was certainly something that was often done throughout the book of Acts. We've seen it happen as the disciples would get together breaking bread. But also there was some sharing. Now, how do y'all think they knew what Paul was doing if he didn't tell them, right? Because they knew what Paul was doing. Because a couple of them said, hey, we don't think you should do that. We don't think you should go up there. You put yourself in danger by going to Jerusalem. So apparently they knew what he was doing because he had told them. He had shared it with them. So there was this kind of sharing of vision and that had happened. So all this goes along with fellowship. And now fellowship, I should say, is much more than just sit down and eating together. Right? Because anybody can sit down and eat together. But when you fellowship as believers, you're sharing with one another your burdens, your concerns, your visions, your ideas. You're sharing with each other, encouraging one another, helping one another. This is all a part of fellowship. And certainly we see that played out throughout these scriptures. But I want you to notice the last theme that we see taking place, and that is ministry. There was actually ministry going on. And if you hadn't noticed it, there was actually, and sometimes I don't think we notice a lot of this because it's stuff that we do in our day-to-day. And that is the exercise of spiritual gifts. Now, how many of you know we all have at least one spiritual gift? Because God has given us that. At least something. Some kind of spiritual gift He's given you. There's a bunch of different ones. And you may or may not know what your gift is. And hopefully you kind of know what area that you're gifted in. Whether that be like a speaking type gift, or whether that be like a serving type gift. Those two categories pretty much kind of separate the two. But you should be exercising it on the day-to-day. Because that's how God made it. It's not that we wait till Sunday to exercise our spiritual gift. It's not that we wait till Wednesday or whenever the church gathers together that we exercise our spiritual gift. We are to exercise our spiritual gifts every day, in the day-to-day. And we often do, and we don't even notice it. And that's what was going on here. Notice that there was some praying going on, because before they went to set sail, they knelt on the shore, they prayed together. The families prayed with Paul and his group. I can imagine, you know, laying hands on everybody, praying for everybody as they're getting ready to take this voyage into the unknown. They don't know where Paul's going. So is prayer, you know, is that not an exercise of a spiritual gift? We might say that that would be. How about giving? Certainly, the spirit of generosity, giving, is one of those spiritual gifts. They were given of their time. No doubt they were given of their resources. These folks were given of their space in their home, allowing them to stay. So that was another exercise of a spiritual gift. Can you think of any other spiritual gifts that were kind of noted during this passage that we read tonight?
Obviously, somebody had to give up the ship, and somebody had to be the captain of the ship, so they're
Yeah.
doing those things too.
Yeah, the hospitality of the captain, you know, or at least pay the way. If they have to pay a fare to get on the ship, that had to be paid. You don't have any indication that there was a payment arrangement made, but, you know, this was a cargo ship, but often that was the kind of thing you did. You kind of got a ride on a ship that was going somewhere already. But, you know, usually in those cases, you might end up having to help, assist. As you will see later on, it was about, you know, the captain called on everybody to help, especially if the ship's under distress. But yeah, that was good, you know, showing the hospitality of the captain or the crew. What else?
Showing faith.
Faith? Paul?
Seeing the strangers and getting on the boat started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Paul was just going on this journey and everybody else going with him. And there were others that joined Paul on the journey. So they had to have faith in that.
It says in verse 4 that the seven said to Paul through the Spirit that he should not go to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Do you think that they were using the gift of discernment, or do you think they were mistaken?
Right there.
You
Did
think-
you look at my notes? I think you did. Discernment. It was a gift there. I believe that's what it was. I believe that was a discernment, a gift of discernment, which is certainly one of the gifts of the Spirit. Where, you know, this person is saying, you know, the Lord's telling me this is not a good thing. It's not going to be good for you. And were they telling them a lie? No. They weren't telling a lie. Because where Paul was going, he was going to die. Okay? He was going to his death. He was going to be bound up. He was going to be killed eventually. And that's exactly what happened. So they weren't telling a lie. It was the Spirit. It was the right Spirit speaking. It was the Spirit of truth speaking into this person.
Which could almost be prophecy.
Yeah, prophesied. Yeah, there was a prophet. Matter of fact, the dude that took his belt and bound up his arms, and he visually, you know, did a visual illustration of it. He said, the man who this belt belongs to will be bound like this in Jerusalem, right? And be turned over to the Gentiles, which is what happened. So that's certainly a gift of prophecy. Any others? How about the gift of empathy, compassion? Remember the folks that said, you know, we don't want you to go there. And then later on, Paul says, why are you weeping? Why are you breaking my heart? You know, Paul said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be bound. I'm ready to die for Jesus. Why are you crying for me? They were weeping. Isn't that not compassion? Isn't that not empathy? You hate to see somebody go to this, you know, to experience all of this pain, experience this, you know, Paul's looming fate. I mean, they really believe Paul is going to die. They're never going to see Paul again. And so there's that empathy. How about the gift of encouragement? Where do you see that played out?
In 14, they said, the will of the Lord be done.
There you go. I like that too. They probably said, hey, we can't convince him otherwise, so the will of the Lord be done then, brother. We'll support you either way. As a matter of fact, they did, because some of them came from Caesarea and got on the boat with them and went with them. So we'll go with you. We'll put ourselves in danger, which goes back to the faith, having the spirit of faith. So we see all of these kind of spiritual gifts, and sometimes I think we overthink spiritual gifts, and we think, man, I got to figure out how I can use my spiritual gift. No, you're probably using your spiritual gift in your life already. In your day-to-day life, you just probably don't recognize it as such.
God doesn't give you spiritual gifts that conflict with your personality.
That's right. That's
So-
right.
So you're using those gifts through your personality and who you are.
Right. He's made you that way anyway.
Right.
He's made you with that personality, so why wouldn't he gift you with that trait that would work right along with?
Or it's even the other way, you are that way because of the way you've been gifted.
That's right.
And
Yeah, it could be. It could be reverse kind of fabrication there. In any case, we shouldn't think ordinary actions like these are not very important, because they are. Without the day-to-day exercising of our spiritual gifts, remember, the church would not grow. The church would not become what the church wants, what God wants the church to be. And by the way, that's why He's given us spiritual gifts, for the edification of the church and for the glorification of God. Okay, those are the two main purposes of spiritual gifts. All right, so let's wrap up tonight's lesson. So the first thing we talked about was hospitality. And it should never be undervalued, right? You should never think, well, all I'm doing is providing somebody a meal. And by the way, it's what makes ministry possible. The little things like this. Whether it's providing a meal, whether it's, helping, somebody with a hotel stay, or making their stay possible, or, providing things for them, or being kind to somebody who comes to church, helping them find a seat. Hospitality is when you come into the church and somebody's sitting in your seat where you normally sit, you find another one. Don't ask them to move, right? That's called hospitality. And that's exercising that helps the ministry go. It helps it work well, and it's something we should all kind of not undervalue, but realize it's very important. How can we show hospitality? Well, I think I mentioned a few ways, but maybe you could think of some ways that you could show hospitality to others as well. And then fellowship is also important. Why is fellowship important?
It's an encouragement.
That's right. That's right.
sometimes you don't know who you need to be hospitable to if you're not around people.
That's right. Yeah, and it shows people that you're important, that they're important to you. When you take time to talk with them, to spend with them, to pause a moment, to listen to them, that's all important. It's one of our core values, is intentional fellowship. That's one of our core values. Do y'all know what the other three core values are here at the church?
Where would we find these?
It's on our website, but it's on the slide of our website. It kind of flips over. Anyway, the core values are, first of all, practical discipleship, right? So it's teaching the God's word in a practical way. That's a core value, and we use Bible study. We use Wednesday night study. We use morning Bible study. We use preaching time, Bible classes and such like that.
Dynamic worship.
Yep, in worship.
I can read.
So dynamic worship would be another core value, which is, making sure we're pointing people to Jesus during the worship, and creating an environment where somebody's heart can be attuned to the Spirit. And then, what's the other two? Intentional fellowship is one, and there's one more.
He's asking me. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, so
It's
wait. Community impact.
Yeah, community impact. So it's getting out, it's outreach. So it's not just about us and just being in and focusing on us as a church and what we need. It's also about getting out and touching others by reaching out in the community.
But the fellowship thing, it's whether we like it or not, being around people or going out of our way to talk to people. Pat and I will never get to where we went through the men's thing, of the larger group down to the smaller to just a few. We never reached that point if we never talked. We never reached that point if we're never in a smaller scenario where we start to get comfortable with each other. And you never get to that point if you're never willing to be a little vulnerable.
Right.
And then a lot more vulnerable.
Yeah.
You got to work your way there.
That's right.
Which takes time and effort.
Yeah. That's right. Trust and everything else builds up there, and growing and
But it doesn't happen overnight. It starts at a really high level of just fellowshipping with the people around.
Right, right, in the larger group, right? It kind of grows from there. So, those are important. Fellowship is certainly vital to our church. If we don't have it, then obviously we're kind of, losing part of the foundation of what we should be building our church on. And then finally, ministry. And when I talk about ministry being equal, it's just that there's not one more important than another. Somebody might have a ministry where they're teaching. Well, their ministry of teaching is not any more important than somebody's ministry of cleaning the church, or taking care of the yard, or taking care of children, or doing a women's ministry. It's all equal, and it's all important. Just like later on, Paul will talk about in the Apostle in the Corinthians, book of Corinthians, that we're all parts of the body. We all make up the body, and every part is important. Anything on this body that we have on us is, has some kind of purpose. And generally, if some part of it is suffering, then it kind of causes pain in the whole other parts of the body. So we understand that all of it is important, and that's the point that Paul is trying to make.
And that's why certain churches and denominations, religion groups really, really fall apart, because the preacher messes up.
That's right.
Because
That's
they draw a focus on the preacher being a position of someone who can't fail, or the position of someone who, if he fails, he's worse than anyone else will.
Right. Yeah. And then, they consider it such a high place that now when that's falling apart, then the church kind of falls apart, which shouldn't be that way.
Right.
But you see that. And I think that's because we kind of focus ourselves on the extraordinariness of this world. And
And we treat church, because it kind of has to be treated corporately.
yeah,
And corporations are run by a board or a president or something.
yeah,
So you always look, and it does make it hard, because ideally we know who the person, the head of the church is Jesus, but we're human, so we
yeah.
look for what we can see, and makes it more difficult.
I think sometimes we just need to slow down maybe and recognize the day-to-day things, the ordinary things that we do in life have value, and they're important, and we shouldn't overlook them. Especially when it comes to the kingdom, because they do make a difference. I read in this little story, a little excerpt about this Robert Farrar Capone wrote in The Supper of the Lamb. He wrote, "How much curious and loving attention was expended by the first man who looked hard enough at the inside of trees, the entrails of cats, the hind ends of horses, the juice of pine trees, to realize he could turn them all into the first fiddle." No doubt his wife urged him to get up and do something useful. He could have silenced her with the greatest reproche of all times. "Don't bother me. I'm creating the possibility of the Bach unaccompanied sonatas." So you think about that. The first fiddle was created by somebody who looked at things that would be considered most mundane and ordinary. No significance whatsoever. Most people just overlook those things. The fact is that that's how our day-to-day is most of the time. It's just the mundane. It's just the ordinary. But remember, it's God that uses the ordinary even much more often than he does the extraordinary to build his kingdom and make it what it is. So let's remember that as we experience those ordinary days. All right, well, we're going to conclude tonight's lesson with the time of prayer and take some prayer requests here in person. If you have a prayer request you'd like for us to pray with you about online, you can leave it on our website, riveroakcc.org/pray, or in the comment section below. I did get one in our prayer box. I always appreciate people putting prayer requests in our prayer box, and that I do check out probably 2 or 3 times a week. Just about every time I'm in here, I go in there and check the box. So don't forget that I am doing that. But a lot of times I treat them kind of confidential because, obviously, sometimes you don't put your name on it, but then, if you put them in a box, I think, I don't want to make it public unless you tell me. So anyway, we'll pray for those as well. But if you have a prayer request you'd like to share with us, we would love to be able to pray with you in those things. But until the next time we see you, which hopefully in person will be very soon, either Friday night or at our Sunday morning service, or even Christmas Eve at 4 p.m., we would love to be able to encourage you along your faith journey. And until next time, may the Lord bless you always.